Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Okay, we've gotten some negative feedback about my timer.
Yeah, it was getting on my nerves, I know.
And you know, we have that email link down and people can give us feedback.
We've been getting feedback. It's good.
Yeah, so we are responsive to this feedback and we're getting rid of the timer.
Good.
Okay? There it goes.
That sounded like some sort of disposal of a timer there.
I threw it over my shoulder. I think it landed on my foot. But
good.
It's history.
The viewers rule here at Blogging Heads TV, and if they didn't like it, it's gone.
Yes, we are deeply appreciative of our readers and responsive.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, you know, you sent me a link to this Chris Caldwell piece in the New York Times Magazine.
Yes,
that was attributing, I guess, Islamic radicalism in Europe to the European welfare states. I just kind of glanced at it, but it struck me as just a fresh and original piece of thinking that was not at all derivative and possibly was without precedent in Western thought. What did you think?
You're just teasing me, Bob, because I wrote something years ago saying that European welfare states cause terrorism.
Yeah, you not only wrote it then, you sent me the link along with the Caldwell link, Mickey. So it was kind of hard for it to escape my notice, you know.
Well, thank you for making the Darwinian mechanics of this segment transparent to our audience. But the Caldwell piece is interesting because it doesn't, in fact, say what I said.
Oh, it doesn't?
My theory, well, it doesn't go that far. My theory is that welfare plus prejudice is the way you create an underclass. In other words, if you have a sort of aggrieved minority in a welfare state, you easily get a vicious circle where the minority says it's not getting jobs through discrimination, and welfare lets them sort of stay in geographically concentrated ghettos where they sort of don't go out in the labor market and fester and stay on welfare.
Gives them a lot of free time, too, to riot and things like that.
Right, although, you know, in the United States since the riots in the 60s, there's been mainly festering and not that much rioting. In France, with these Islamic ghettos in the banlieues, there's been rioting recently. It seems to me, and this is playing out in Sweden too, which of all places is sort of supposed to be the model was once the model for how you integrate immigrants. They have an extensive welfare state, and they have exactly the same process. They have these little ethnic ghettos on the outskirts of town where the people don't have jobs, and they stay on welfare, and they feel alienated. And it's not nearly as advanced as in France or the United States, but it's exactly the same process. What's interesting is that Caldwell, this is a very good piece, he goes into all the subtleties, the specifically Swedish subtleties and how it happened in Sweden, but it's basically the same process. He does not draw the obvious conclusion, which is the way to solve the problem is to cut back on welfare benefits and force people to go out into the labor market, which will in turn prompt them to integrate into society. He just sort of says, well, you need uniformity for a welfare state. They don't have uniformity. Maybe they should sort of...
Wait, uniform standards among nations?
No, ethnic uniformity. And I think that's right. Anytime you get a minority in there that can be discriminated against, you have potential for this underclass phenomenon to happen.
So it's not about the welfare benefits to him. It's about job discrimination?
Yeah, he just doesn't draw the logical conclusion that what you should do is cut back on the welfare state. He seems to sort of imply they need to sort of free up their economy, and he makes some weird argument that because they use informal labor markets, that's the reaction against the sort of statist uniformity. But
so he accepts their view that they are being discriminated against, and he says discrimination is the problem.
Well, yes, and they obviously are being discriminated against. I mean, American blacks are discriminated against. I mean, there's discrimination. It's a vicious circle, and you're discriminated against, so you develop a sort of oppositional attitude, which means that people are going to discriminate against you even more.
Okay.
That's sort of what happens, and that's what's happening in Sweden. He just doesn't make he just doesn't make the obvious connection, which is they should do what we did, which is reform their welfare systems. He sort of implies they should somehow free up their economy. It's a weird argument. I mean, it's not even really an argument. It's more a piece of journalism.
Well, I still say, even though it's not strictly parasitic upon the Calcian body of political thought, you still get credit for prescience, because your blog item, was written like three months after 9/11, and pointed in this general direction. And I actually think it really was impressive.
Thank you.
We will link to it, and they can they can go read it, and like me, be nostalgic for the days when your blog was had a more simple, clean-cut design and was not encrusted with internet dating service ads and stuff.
I think we'll link to the Slate version, which gives them the internet dating services too.
No, the link I followed led me back to the pure and simple kausfiles design.
Okay.
It was amazing.
Okay.
Back to the Future.
Well, I guess since we've gotten rid of the timer and the timer would have gone off by now if we had the timer, we should maybe ring the bell and move on to the next topic.
All right. The next topic would also be Muslim related, would it not?
Yes, and this story about these cartoons is so still ongoing, it's impossible to avoid.
Right.
There was a story in the New York Times which you thought was very significant. I read it. I didn't quite understand the significance.
Well, it just stressed, it was about this meeting of Muslim nations in December, and the headline was something, it used the word crystallize, how this crystallized the anti-cartoon resentment. And what happened was that these nations, the Muslim nations, agreed that this Denmark cartoon was a legitimate grievance. Then these leaders all went home, and a number of them played it up on state media. And that was apparently a threshold. But in general, what struck me about the story is how clear it became that this was not some kind of spontaneous uprising. And I don't mean that it was only orchestrated by cynical states like Iran and Syria, although that did happen, I think, in the later portions of it. But the way it began as a kind of an interest group grievance that wasn't addressed. The Muslims in Denmark were organized. They were complaining about it. They wanted a meeting with the Prime Minister of Denmark. He wouldn't give them the meeting. They kept taking it to the next higher level. They finally took it to this meeting of Muslim states. This was not spontaneous combustion by any means. It was relentless lobbying that finally paid off.
And what's the upshot of that?
Well, it kind of gets back to the thing I was trying to sell you on 2 days ago, I guess, without success. Let me revisit the argument I was trying to make. The one that some people would dismiss as abject moral relativism. Maybe you did. I don't know. Somebody would. The point was just that we're not as different from Muslims as we like. I mean, American society is not as different from this Muslim milieu as some of us would like to think. I mean, the premise of this Danish paper, when it did this little provocative experiment, was that, look, in Western liberal societies, we will not be intimidated by interest groups into publishing things that they find offensive. Okay? That was almost the stated premise of the experiment, and certainly I think a lot of people continue to view the thing this way, that's what's really... That's what's on trial here, is this Western principle that we are not intimidated by fear of offending interest groups, right? You may not think of it that way, but you'll agree that a lot of people do, right?
Yes.
And as I said last time, the fact is, Western newspapers are intimidated by interest groups and into not publishing a number of things. The thought experiment I did was, you can imagine a cartoon that would be interpreted as racist, that certainly somewhere in America finds sympathy with some newspaper editor who nonetheless does not publish it for fear of the reaction of the interest group, right? So they are, in fact, intimidated by fear of the interest group. That happens, right?
Right, but there are also things get published that offend interest groups all the time, and we don't say we don't hold the government responsible for publishing them.
No,
we hold the newspaper responsible for publishing them.
Wait, let me just run through this. First of all, no, there's a whole category of cartoons that, in fact, are not ever published by any daily American newspapers. You can imagine these cartoons, and they are not published. They're not about religion; they're about race.
Right. That's why the blogosphere is thriving.
Yeah. Well, fine. Anyway, just follow me. So the fact is that it is a policy of newspapers to be responsive to reaction against interest groups.
But the very premise of this protest isn't that Arab societies are similar to Western societies. It's that Arab societies are different than Western societies. If I quote from this New York Times piece, it quotes a Professor Sari Hanafi, who says that Arab governments resentful of the Western push for democracy for them, the protest presented an opportunity to undercut the appeal of the West to Arab citizens.
Totally.
The freedom pushed by the West, they seem to say, brought with it disrespect for Islam. And so they are saying that our societies are different. We won't have disrespect for Islam in our societies.
Mickey,
they do in the West. That's true, but that just shows
Mickey,
how the societies are different.
that's an interesting tangent that I do want to pick up. But let me finish, because it's not related to the whole cartoon experiment, because the whole cartoon experiment is not about Arab societies. That newspaper was making a statement about Western society. It wasn't saying we're challenging Saudi law on cartoons. It was saying we're challenging the way Muslims will be allowed to react. We're saying that interest groups do not intimidate newspapers in Western society. I'm saying that's nonsense.
I never said that. When did I say that? I said that Western societies are fundamentally different from Arab societies. It's not just a couple points on a sliding scale. And in Western societies, the Arab states are right. You will inevitably have Britney Spears and all sorts of things that Arabs, fundamentalist Islamists might find offensive, including caricatures of Muhammad. Okay. And it seems to me that is a difference, and that's the fundamental dilemma, because we're basically asking them to buy into this. A fundamental difference is what is found offensive, okay? In America, we are very sensitive about race, and rightly so, I think. I think there should be taboos. But the fact is there are taboos, and what keeps them in place is fear of interest group reaction. And there's a lot of people, moralizing about this thing who do not acknowledge that about American society. Now, you might go on to say, and you said this last time, in fact, like, well, okay, interest groups would react, but they wouldn't kill somebody over it. Well, wait a second. First of all, let's do the thought experiment in America. You actually can imagine cartoons so offensive that there would be a threat of actual violence. It all depends on the circumstances. And the point, and that gets us back to this New York Times story. What this showed is, it is not the case that if you publish a picture of Muhammad in a newspaper, automatically Muslims go out and get violent. This was very dependent on circumstance. This Danish group had to work forever to get this on the world's radar screen. Okay, Bob. Let me stick a word in here. There's a good piece by Amir Taheri in the New York Post about how it wasn't an accident. It was picked up by Arab governments who saw it as a way to strike a blow back at the West.
That was in the Times piece, yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand where you're going with this. Are you saying that our societies are the same, so that there's no contradiction between Islamic faith and Western society? And what's your point? I'm
saying our societies are not as different as you think they are.
But they're different enough that there's a genuine clash of cultures here.
What is the difference stated at the most general level? That they practice censorship? No, I've just established that we practice censorship.
The difference is if you allow our style freedom, things will happen that will offend the religion of 1 billion Muslims in the world. That's the contradiction. It's a particular discrete...
My only point is that I'm not sure I'd use the phrase style of freedom. I would say the disagreement is over what is taboo. We have things that are so taboo that if you published certain kinds of cartoons, they would lead to demonstrations that might well turn violent. That's one thing I'm saying. And the other thing I would stress is, again, there's this idea that Muslims punish this with violence. No, it depends entirely on circumstance. 20 years ago, this would not have happened at all. I mean, these demonstrations are fundamentally not about this cartoon. This cartoon triggered them. The rage that's being unleashed has to do with lots of other things. It has to do with pornography on the internet that they attribute to the West. It has to do with grievances of Palestinians. It has to do with the Iraq War. It has to do with things Bush has said. It has the fuel for the rage is not the cartoon, okay? And again, 20 years ago this would not have happened. In 10 years it might not happen. There are just so many people on the American right who are eager to take this particular reaction as some kind of icon of Muslim culture, and I just think it's all very circumstantial. It's all very dependent on circumstance, and it is at some fundamental level less different from American society than we would all like to pretend. We do not live in a realm of free expression in America.
But Bob, even if one concedes all of that,
Do you concede all? Wait, do you concede all of that?
You're dancing around the central problem.
First of all, wait. Do you concede all of that?
Well, let me just make my point, okay? The central problem is, it is true that there is an incommensurability between the practice of religion without blasphemy, as these people conceive it, and of Western-style democracy. And I think it's, in our view, both of our views is that eventually Arab societies will have to give way to a freer society that probably does involve things that would now be considered blasphemy, but we have to somehow deny it. I still don't understand what your point is.
Okay. That is not the only kind of reaction that's going to have to take place. A lot of that is going to have to take place. But another thing that's going to have to take place is that we're going to have to get more sensitive to the feelings of Muslims than this idiotic Danish editor was. And let me sustain the analogy that I'm trying to make here. In America, we long ago realized that for a bunch of different races to live together in one society, we have to be extremely sensitive to the sensibilities of different ethnic groups. And there has to be an implicit censorship, and there is, for fear of offending specific groups. And I'm saying increasingly we all live in a global society with different religious groups, and people in the West are going to... One thing that's going to have to happen, in addition to these Muslim societies changing a lot, is that Westerners are going to have to become more sensitive to the sensibilities of different religions, because increasingly we're all in one society.
But I would not have published those cartoons, and I wouldn't mind if there were a taboo around making fun of Muhammad, similar to the taboo around racist cartoons
That's
in America.
That's my only point.
But they don't like Britney Spears, as you say. They don't like pornography. So in order to not offend them, we would have to make far deeper changes than just not caricaturing Muhammad. We'd have to get rid of Britney Spears. We'd have to not show women's belly buttons in ads. We would have to abandon hip-hop, rock music, and pornography, and we're not about to do that.
No, that's a ridiculously binary way to look at it. So did I just say we can't do anything that offends them at all? No.
But you
offense
said
is part of life, Mickey. I'm saying things that grossly offend their religious sensibility.
No, but you said it wasn't about Muhammad. You said it wasn't about Muhammad, it was about pornography. No, but now you're saying we can appease them by getting rid of the character Muhammad. No, it's not about Muhammad. You just said that.
No, but if that
it's about pornography, and we're not about to get rid of the depiction of sexually explicit women. That's not going to happen.
No, Mickey, if images of Muhammad are a reliable trigger for things like episodes like this that make the whole thing much worse, then we should avoid them. Are you aware of any images of Britney Spears that have triggered global rioting? Did I miss something?
Well, but you just said that was what it was all about, Bob.
No,
You're the one that said that.
That is one of many things. And we don't. And look, we don't have control over Britney Spears. We do have control over whether we invade Iraq. We do have control over. We have some influence over the Palestinian problem. We have control over a lot of the root causes.
But we don't have control over whether we
should address those.
But you're saying we should control people who depict Muhammad.
No, I didn't say that.
I say that that's similar to Britney Spears, and yes, we can do one, but we can't do the other, so we still have this problem.
No, I said we should encourage a global norm that is analogous to the norm that encourages restraint among American newspaper editors in the realm of race. And I didn't say we should lock up this Danish editor. I said that we're moving into a global society that's going to have to be governed by informal sanctions, and one of them is for people like us to say this Danish newspaper editor was an idiot. Well, and he's indicated that in lots of ways since then, by the way.
Well, this gets into an interesting debate between Andrew Sullivan and Hugh Hewitt in the blogosphere. Hugh Hewitt sort of agrees with you. He's on the right, but he sort of agrees with you that this was a big setback in the war on terror. It infuriated a lot of people needlessly. Would have been better if these cartoons hadn't been published. Sullivan says, no, it's a step forward in the war against terror in some sort of dialectical way, because it's revealed the Muslims for the anti-freedom fascists that they really are, etc., etc., and now they better shape up because the world's against them. I think I know whose side you're going to take in that, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, and it isn't just who I agree with. It's that one of them actually presented an argument and the other one didn't. I mean, Andrew's argument is we shouldn't coddle them. And, I mean, that's kind of an argument, but it went no deeper than that at all. I mean, the implied argument is that, all of Muslim society is analogous to a child you're bringing up. And that was... There is no argument in Andrew's piece beyond that, and that's something he does sometimes. It was much more an assertion than an argument. Hewitt actually made an argument. I mean, he actually adduced evidence, at least. He said, look, who does this make happy? What just happened? Who does this make happy? It makes the leaders of Syria and Iran happy. They're exploiting it. They like it. It makes the king of Jordan unhappy. You know, he's our ally. The guys who like it are our enemies, more or less, certainly not our allies. You know, that should tell you something. And that's a very good point.
Well,
is that the leaders in the Muslim world who are putting their chips on a future of moderate Islam and are placing their bets on that are unhappy about what has happened. And that's actual evidence.
They like it in the short term, but the question is, will it come back to bite them in the long term? I agree with you, but I think Sullivan has a point, and there's a germ of truth in that all sorts of intellectual elites, especially in Europe, are saying, well, wait a minute, you know, these Islamic hotheads, and agree they're only a minority, but they're a minority that's encouraged by the governments, really are ridiculous, and the scales have fallen from our eyes. And there's, I think, a little bit of that is going on, and
wait,
that
say that again. How is it working causally that this is...
That people are saying, you Islamic rioters, you're behaving like children. You want to kill, you want to burn down Denmark and punish the Danish government for something one idiot newspaper publisher did. That's not the way things work.
People within the Islamic world are saying that.
I think no. I think elites in Europe that have previously said, oh, it's all America's fault because of the invasion of Iraq are now saying, well, gee, maybe these Islamic societies really are behaving childishly, and the governments are encouraging the childishness for their own short-term gains, and maybe we should be more skeptical of you know, indulging in sort of coddling of Islamic fanatics.
Yeah, I'm not sure Andrew actually said that, but in any event, I don't know what the evidence is that if that's happening, that it would work.
I mean, the basic moose point to make here.
Was that a moose deployment I heard?
If I can you hear me? The basic moose point to make here is that the radical Islamists are right, and democracy really is incompatible with Islam as they practice it. And we have to sort of wean them away from Islam as they practice it while we pretend that they're not right about that essential truth. And I'm all for dissembling and pretending that they're not right, but in fact, just between you and me and the cameras here, they are right.
Wait, now who's right about what?
They're right that you can't have a democracy without Britney Spears, and if your religion says Britney Spears is blasphemy, your religion's going to lose.
You can't have liberal democracy. You can have democracy.
Yeah. Yes. No, but there are also forces of capitalism and market economies that corrode traditional values in any sort of market democracy.
Yeah.
And they're going to lose. I mean, if the world...
we may all lose if we don't work this out, Mickey. It's not a zero-sum game. Civilization may go down in flames if we don't work this out.
No, I understand. I'm with you. I'm just saying that is the central unpleasant truth, is that there really is a contradiction here that we're trying to fudge.
No, free expression is part of modernization, apparently. There are certain aspects of new technologies that permit you to consume various potentially offensive things more privately than you might have otherwise. So there are ways of working it out. In fact, one argument is that that's what's going on in Iran now in ways that has actually weakened the reform movement, because people just go into their apartments the government bans Western music on the radio station, but the kids don't care. They go download it on the internet, and so they don't protest against an authoritarian government.
Well, but you're saying that that's the germs of a solution, which is you pretend to ban Britney Spears in public, and people download her videos in private. That might work out.
Well, no, I am saying in some ways that could be part of an at least temporary accommodation. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've battled our way to agreement again.
Yeah. I feel a lot better. You know what happened to me? I had this coffee, and then I had this fear that it was decaf, because I got it at the YMCA. You never know whether they'll label it correctly. And so then I had some that I knew was caffeinated, and now I'm starting to worry that the decaf was caffeinated. So sorry if I got out of line there.
No, you were not out of line. People like conflict.
Yeah, they like somebody to sound like a raging maniac, and that's what we try to bring them.
A raging relativist maniac. Next up is what? Democrats?
The Democrats.
Yeah, there was this extraordinary article. I thought it was extraordinary in the New York Times by Adam Nagurny, who I have previously
ridiculed ruthlessly.
Ridiculed for wishful, hopeful, pro-democratic thinking. Basically saying Democrats are sensing missed opportunities. They have all these issues, but the Democrats are now waking up and realizing it's not going to work again, is it? We're heading for a defeat. This is all, this is all going to be a disaster. And I took this as a very positive sign that Democrats are having this crisis of confidence before the election instead of after the election, and enough before the election so that they can actually do something to correct it.
It's just grounded in their failure to exploit seeming vulnerabilities, right?
Well, there's sort of two schools. There's the Arianna Huffington school, and she has a long blog item on this subject, which is they lack self-confidence for stupid reasons. They have all these issues. They have Katrina, the war in Iraq, wiretapping, corruption. If only they attack on all fronts on these issues, they'll win. And that's one camp. And my camp, the other camp, is no, that's not enough. The intense self-doubters who think that all the Democratic elites are discredited. People are sick of Nancy Pelosi. They're sick of John Kerry. They think Hillary Clinton's not going to make it. They're sick of her. And we need a new savior. And unfortunately, the only Democratic savior on the horizon is John McCain, who's going to be the Republican nominee for president. So that's the dilemma
Wait, there's another savior.
Deep self-haters and doubters.
There's another potential savior. I think I can prove rigorously that this man is the Messiah. You ready for this?
Okay.
Al Gore is very deeply psychologically motivated to be the anti-Bush, right? I mean, if he
and the
anti-Hillary, right? He's motivated first of all to get in the fight. If he wins, the policies he pursues will be the antithesis of George Bush, right? Now, to some extent they would be anyway, but he has an additional psychological motivation grounded in his electoral history, as we know.
Right.
Now, my view, of course, is that Bush is not literally the Antichrist, of course, but metaphorically the opposite of what the world needs right now. I mean, I could just go down the line. This is just my view, but I could go down the line and argue that Bush is the opposite of what the world needs at this crucial moment in history.
What's the upshot?
What's that?
What's the upshot of this?
The upshot is the following. If Bush is the Antichrist and Gore is the anti-Bush, does it not follow that Gore is the Messiah?
Well, a couple points. This is Gore. I think Gore will run, and it's a potential point of agreement between people who are looking for a new Messiah and people who want to press hard on all the issues, because Gore will do that. The problem is, Gore is characterologically flawed. He's a micromanager. He basically wants to be a college professor. Look at the decisions he made in Florida. They were all wrong. So he screwed it up. And he also seems way too angry. Second, he contradicts what I think is the winning Democratic theme, which is actually suggested by Peggy Noonan, which is a return to normalcy. I mean, Bush has the country in overdrive over this terrorist threat. Okay, we were sick of it in 2004. We're really sick of it now. And Democrats need to just say, look, we're going to calm down, we're going to handle foreign policy, and we're going to return to normal domestic issues. And this is a way for them to segue from foreign policy to domestic.
Remember, one reason...
And Gore can't make that argument.
I don't think it works anyway, Mickey, because remember, one reason that the Democrats are failing to exploit this wiretapping scandal is Americans are very concerned about terrorism.
Right, but you normalize that.
You tell them they should have different attitudes, and then they will?
No, you say we're scared of terrorism. We're going to wiretap and catch terrorists, but we're going to legalize.
I mean, first of all, Mickey, there's a decent chance there will be a terrorist act of significance somewhere in the world, possibly even in America, between the time the Democratic candidate first says that and the election, in which case it looked like a fool.
That would be a problem with my strategy.
I mean, look, I think they need to say this terrorism threat is serious, But Bush has just been completely wrong-headed because he doesn't understand the nature. It's not that easy to convey this in sound bites. I don't think it's totally beyond doing.
I think that's a tough sell.
I think it's tough sell too. But see, from I actually believe the thing is that the situation is this serious that you actually need to implement the right policies. So from my point of view, what's the point of electing some Democratic hack who doesn't get the picture anyway?
It's not a Democratic hack. It's a return to normalcy would, in its very nature, calm down the Arab world, and we would not make promoting democracy and our way of life everywhere the linchpin of all of our politics. And it would accomplish what you wanted. You just wouldn't have to force Americans to say, hey, you've been wrong all these years when you followed Bush. Why don't you admit you were wrong and admit we were right? That never works in politics, and you're going to lose if you pursue that in-your-face, Bush is wrong about everything policy. You're not going to get what you want.
I think people realize that the situation is serious enough that you actually need some kind of inspirational rallying message. I mean, I think the general sense should be, yes, America is called to greatness at this moment in history, but it is overwhelmingly a moral greatness that we need to exhibit. And Bush has just fallen down on the job. And you can list, Abu Ghraib, and you can list various miscalculations and say that, yes, military force is part of it, but the instinctive over-reliance on it is bad, and above all, our job is to, is one of kind of healing and to be a role model for the world and so on.
Well, those are two interesting polls, because I agree that return to normalcy is not a clarion call of idealism that people can rally behind and feel moral about. And if you need that, then that's not the theme. But I just think it's very hard to convince people that Bush was immoral and you should. Why bother?
I'm not saying he personally is immoral. Although this
anyway, go ahead.
But it does get back to the wiretapping thing. Does it seem to you impossible for the Democrats to make the following distinction? And this gets at my surprise that you don't have a little more outrage about the whole Bush wiretapping thing than you do. Do you think the Democrats could possibly distinguish between the question of whether this wiretapping program is an effective and legitimate thing that should be authorized under law, okay? That question. And B, the question of whether we should stand by and do nothing when the president knowingly violates the law, deems himself to be above the law. I think the failure of the Democrats is to conflate those two issues, right?
Well, but it's
you seem personally totally untroubled by the latter thing. It doesn't bother you that Bush just goes and does whatever he wants. He thinks he has unlimited power because we're at war, and until it gets revealed by the New York Times, he has no obligation to reveal it.
It bothers me, but I think it's a valid intellectual distinction. I think it's hard to make the argument that what they did was right and necessary, the war against terror, but even though it's a bit of a gray area constitutionally, they should have come down on one side or the other. I mean, if it were a slam dunk constitutionally, then maybe. But there are reasons they did what they did. They did what they did because it might be unconstitutional. The Constitution's obsolete. It has this ridiculous probable cause requirement.
So the justification...
And they're dancing around that, so they rather than go to the courts where a bunch of liberal lawyers who are hewing to the Constitution will bite their program to death, they decided not to go to the courts at all. And then
so your justification for Bush doing this thing that he was not legally authorized to do is that he was not legally authorized to do it.
There was a chance that it would be nibbled to death by legalistic liberal ducks, yes. And he had a colorable argument, so he stuck with the colorable argument.
They didn't even get which colorable argument? You mean the authorization, that congressional resolution?
No, the colorable argument is that FISA doesn't control here, that FISA doesn't handle this, FISA wasn't intended to handle this. There are a bunch of lawyers who worked on FISA who say this is a different situation, and that in the absence of congressional statement to the contrary and a law to the contrary, the president can do what he did. Anyway, there's an obvious potential solution that will put the issue to rest, which is Senator Specter's solution was very reasonable. Every 45 days the federal court reviews it to make sure they're not out of hand. It seems a totally Congress passes a law saying that this is what happens. The federal courts supervise it. Every 45 days they supervise it, and then it's legalized, and end of story. I just don't see where this is an issue that's going to decide the election one way or the other.
No, it doesn't seem like it does not have the earmarks of a killer issue for the Democrats so far. I'm just wondering if they couldn't have handled it better.
No, they definitely could have handled it better. But and Elaine Kmark wrote a pretty good op-ed piece in Newsday about suggesting exactly what you suggested. I just don't think it has a lot of valence. Anyway, all of this discussion is irrelevant because John McCain's going to be elected president with 70% of the vote.
Oh, please, that's so depressing a thought.
Why do we even worry about what the Democrats are going to do for 2008? It's half the Democrats are going to vote for McCain, and I'm going to be one of them. He had this dust up with Barack Obama that I was very amusing this week, where he sort of put Obama in his place. Pointing out that Obama said he was for bipartisan reform, but when push came to shove, Obama joined sort of Harry Reid in this more elaborate Democratic anti-corruption proposal, which, like all out parties, is designed to be unacceptable to a bipartisan majority, because Democrats want the issue, they don't necessarily want to actually accomplish reform. Same on wiretapping, by the way. There's always that dilemma. And McCain showed that he has the power. He's so popular, he can take on the most popular figure in the Democratic Party, cuff him about the ears, and Obama has to come back and josh about it. And now they're having a love fest and joking about their.
Well, that's in Obama's nature, I think. I don't think that is some kind of tribute to McCain.
Oh, I think it is. I think if he did call him cranky, that's as far as he got. But and he probably is cranky.
Who called him cranky?
Obama said, "Oh, John McCain, he's a war hero. He gets cranky every now and then." That's basically what he said. I think it means you don't mess with John McCain.
Oh, for crying out loud, Mickey, this is ridiculous.
What's so terrible
about McCain? It's just this isolated little thing that, for reasons I don't understand, happened to resolve itself without either guy being completely humiliated, and you're saying it's a sign of his command of public opinion. Most Americans haven't even heard about this.
Right, but very few other politicians would have the balls to even go after Obama.
I'm not saying McCain has no nerve, and I'm not even saying he can't get elected. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he could get elected. After all, he would be a dangerous president, and so far America's recent record is to elect dangerous presidents.
What's so terrible about it?
Oh, this guy's never seen a war he didn't want to start. I mean, the thing about, who wants to, he's already just about come out for bombing Iran, hasn't he?
I don't quite think
he's come closer than the administration has.
He's to the right of the administration.
Yes, he's to the right of the administration. He was foursquare in favor of the Iraq War. Can you remind me how that worked out, Mickey? And he's completely unrepentant.
Too early to tell, Bob. Too early to tell.
Yeah, get back to me in a millennium. And he is reflexively aggressive, and that's what the Obama thing shows above all. He is reflexively aggressive. He has no self-doubt. And if you think that's the kind of guy we want leading this country on the foreign policy stage right now, I think I have some recent precedents that suggest otherwise.
Well, first, he's reflexively aggressive, but he has both the press, the media, which he's sort of addicted to, and the State Department to calm him down. Second, it seems to me because he's susceptible, I'm just making the case for him, because he's susceptible to press pressure, and he has such an unblemished record as an aggressive hawk, he may be the only person who can calm things down on go-to-China grounds. So it does seem to me as long as he can be led around the nose by Tim Russert and the liberal media because of his addiction to the spotlight, it seems to me there's reason for hope.
When you're president, you don't have to worry about getting the spotlight. I'll tell you, a guy I could live with easily is Chuck Hagel. There's somebody whose foreign policy, among moderate Republicans, his foreign policy instincts are much better than McCain's. He's a war hero, or at least a war veteran. I think he's some kind of hero. Perfectly decent, middle American.
There's a big article by Joseph Lelyveld in the New York Times that I haven't read about him. He's always left me completely cold. His specialty is he gets on Meet the Press by pissing on his fellow Republicans without really offering anything constructive in its place. And he's just a...
Whereas McCain does it by pissing on Barack Obama, which you much prefer.
No, McCain says what he's for. Hagel just sort of snipes at... he snipes at the Iraq War without saying what he'd actually do. McCain says what he'd do.
That's an alternative policy.
But Hagel didn't have the balls to say that.
Well, he's a Republican.
He just gets on for having doubts.
No, you're seeing a guy who's hemmed in by his predicament. He would like to be president, but he has to win the Republican primary first. That's all that's going on there, is he's much more rhetorically constrained than McCain is. He knows what he'd do. He's an internationalist.
But what's the point of being, you could make the same argument for McCain. McCain's just being bellicose because he knows he has to recapture the right if he's going to win the nomination. You're making the same excuse for Hagel. I mean, Hagel, what's he ever said except sponsoring a version of campaign reform that was weak and kowtowed to lobbyists? What's he ever done?
First of all, you just said that
constructive?
return for normalcy is a winning strategy. Sounds like he'd bring us that.
Well, that's a good argument. But I mean, we want return for normalcy under somebody who can inspire confidence that he's actually going to accomplish something domestically. What do we especially need done domestically,
from your point of view?
How's Chuck Hagel going to bring us national health insurance? He's not.
I don't know that he's any less likely to do it than McCain is, actually.
Oh, much less likely. McCain is totally susceptible to the press's blandishments in that respect.
Well, anyway, there's a related issue of whether Lieberman sold out Barack Obama in this McCain-Obama tiff.
Yeah, there was a blog that noted that on Imus that Lieberman basically sold him down the river and said that McCain was right. And I think that's sort of because McCain was right, and also because Lieberman knows that McCain's the bigger alpha, the bigger gorilla in this, and he's the guy who he can't afford to annoy.
Well, I actually heard that show, and what Lieberman did is twice say Barack Obama could have been clearer in his letter. So to the extent that he laid blame at anybody's doorstep, it was Obama's. It raises the question, that something I've wondered about. Why is Lieberman a Democrat? Why doesn't he just change parties? I don't know that much about. Probably the answer lies somewhere in his domestic policies, because on foreign policy he might as well be Dick Cheney, and he's extremely irritating about it. And, in kind of standing up and defending Bush as if he already were a Republican. Why doesn't he just change parties?
Well, he's irritating about everything he does, but because he's sanctimonious. But, I assume it's domestic policy. I mean, he believes in an active, government that...
But he's not an old-fashioned liberal, right? He's more of a neoliberal.
Provides services and...
He could be a moderate Republican, right? Except on foreign policy, where he's a right-wing
Well, this is the problem I have myself. I mean, why aren't I a moderate Republican?
Well, that's an excellent question, but I don't think we have time for that little drama. We should devote a show to that.
But Lieberman is very conservative on foreign policy, so he feels the dilemma more strongly.
And then also there's the fact that he was seen in public smooching with Bush. I mean, if that shouldn't cause you to change parties.
Well, Bush just, I went and saw that video, and I urge our viewers to go back and look at it. It seems to me Bush may just have been whispering something in his ear.
No way, man, no way.
There was no tongue. You didn't see any tongue.
Well, you couldn't at that resolution.
I wish we
had better movie, but no, there was stuff going on.
Okay, well, that would be a good way to end it.
Whoa, this is...
So our readers can make up their own minds, and they can send us email using the handy feedback form on the site.
Yeah, we still are looking. We've gotten a few replies. This question of what Bush was thinking when he kissed him, and we're going to field a few more before we declare a winner.
Okay.
Well, this has been intense, man. I'm really tired. I gotta go take a nap.
Try 1 cup of coffee next time.
Or 2 decafs, right.
And I'll try 3, and then we'll be an equipoise.
Okay. It'll be like Crossfire. All right.
Okay.
See you around.
See ya.